Hey guys, it's Sagar and welcome to my third video of this year. In this one, we are going to take a very detailed look at the cameras on the Xiaomi 11i Hypercharge. Now, just to remind you guys, the Xiaomi 11i Hypercharge and the regular 11i have the exact same cameras, so no matter which of these two phones you are looking to get, this video will be helpful for you. We have over 100 image and video samples to go through, and I don't want this video to be too long, so let's dive straight in with the camera specs. Although it looks like there are 5 round cutouts in this camera module, only 3 of them have actual camera sensors behind it. Primary camera gets a 108 megapixel Samsung HM2 sensor with f1.9 aperture. Don't worry, I did not show wrong camera as the primary one. This one right here has the 108 megapixel sensor and not this one. This camera has an 8 megapixel sensor, f2.2 aperture and an ultra wide angle lens with 120-degree field of view. Third and the final camera gets a 2 megapixel sensor, f2.4 aperture and a macro lens. After having used the 5 megapixel telemacro camera in some of the mid-budget Xiaomi and Redmi phones last year, this 2 megapixel macro camera is definitely a downgrade and a step in the wrong direction by Xiaomi. The main rear camera can shoot unstabilized 4K 30fps videos. It can also shoot 1080p 60fps videos, again unstabilized. 1080p 30fps videos get electronic stabilization. You can shoot 120fps slow motion videos in 1080p and 240 and 920fps slow motion videos at 720p resolution. At the front, there is a 16 megapixel selfie camera with f2.4 aperture and it can shoot 1080p videos at up to 60fps. Those were specs of all the 4 cameras on this phone. Before we get to the image and video samples, if you are new to this channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the bell icon next to it. That way, you won't miss out on any of the amazing videos coming up on this channel. Let us begin with the daytime shots. Pune has been a bit cloudy in the last couple of days, so I don't have any images in bright sunlight. The main camera still takes good images in these diffuse lighting conditions. Now this is a 108 megapixel sensor, but by default it captures pixel bin 12 megapixel images. So the images that we are looking at right now are 12 megapixel ones. Unless we zoom in, the images look good. But as we start zooming in, we see that these images don't hold as many details as we would hope it would. There is also a lot of noise in these shots. The whole idea of using pixel binning is to have bigger individual pixels, so there would be more information in each shot with less noise. But that doesn't seem to be the case in these shots. Let me clarify, these images do look good at a first look, but they don't have enough details in them, especially the ones that you take indoors during the daytime. Coming to the colors, I feel they look a bit muted or faded compared to how the scene looked in real life. It seems like there is slightly less contrast in these images, and the ISP on this phone is always trying to bring up the shadows even if the HDR mode is turned off. This often results in more noise in the shot. Every now and then, the main camera tries to overexpose the shot, so unless you tap on the brightest part of the image or adjust the exposure manually, some parts of your image will be overexposed, like you can see on these yellow flowers. Overall, the colors don't look bad, but they are just not the accurate representation of how the scene looked in real life. We see a lot of dark shadow and less information in this shot, but as I turn the HDR mode on, the image looks so much better. HDR mode brought back a lot of information from the shadows here, and it also made sure to preserve the details in the brighter parts of the image. HDR mode on this phone is not the best, but in most cases it does a good enough job. Without it turned on in this image, either it would have been underexposed to compensate for the brighter area outside, or it would have been overexposed to show the information in the shadows. But thanks to the HDR mode turned on, the overall image looks balanced. That being said, I found that the HDR mode adds a lot of sharpening to its shots, which sometimes makes it look unnatural. I found this to be the case in a lot of shots when the HDR mode was turned on, and I don't like the over-sharpened look in my shots. So I kept the HDR mode off in most of my shots and turned it on manually only when I felt that the situation really demanded it. While trying to take close-up shots, I ran into some focusing issues with the main camera. At first I thought since it's a bigger sensor, the minimum focusing distance might be slightly on the higher side. But for some shots like these, the camera just didn't want to set the focus on the flowers no matter what I did. While in some other cases, the focusing was very accurate, fast and on point as you see here. So to get to the bottom of this, I tried it many times and I found that the main camera has a tough time setting the focus if there is a bright light source behind the subject, like the sky in this shot and while I was trying to focus on this flower. But when the background is not as bright, the camera focuses without any issues, just something that you guys should know. For this close-up shot, the camera was again not setting the focus. But after I brought the exposure slider down manually and the sky behind was not overexposed anymore, the camera was able to quickly set the focus on the tree. Once the focus is set, the close-up shots look very good. Although the sensor is big, the minimum focusing distance is still really good on this phone. The subject closest to the camera or the one that you tap on is in perfect sharp focus, and the background gets a very nice and natural looking bokeh. Just be aware about the focus hunting issue with the brighter background, and you should be fine for taking close-up shots with this phone. You can get even closer to your subject by switching to the macro lens. Since there is just a 2 megapixel sensor, you won't see as many details in these macro shots, and the lens in front of it is also not telemacro like we saw on some of the other Xiaomi phones, so the overall macro shots from this camera are just not that pleasing to look at. You can get somewhat okay images if you are in very bright lighting conditions, but then again be aware that the camera tries to overexpose the shot, so you will have to bring the exposure slider down manually until the macro shot looks good and usable. As I said before, all these were 12 megapixel pixel binned images. To take high resolution shots, switch to the 108 megapixel mode. These 108 megapixel shots have incredible amount of details in them. If we zoom in on both these shots, you can see everything in the high resolution shot being much sharper. This is true when there is plenty of light around, but as the light gets lower, or even in these diffuse lighting conditions, these 108 megapixel shots quickly start falling apart. As I zoom in on this shot, you can see there are barely any details, and the complete image has a watercolor-like effect. I have never been too fond of the high resolution mode on any phones, but when the conditions are right, it does come in handy and lets you crop in on certain part of the image later on. If you're taking these shots indoors, you will barely find any difference in the 108 megapixel shots. In fact, 12 megapixel ones seem to have more details. So if you want to take high resolution shots, make sure to take them in bright lighting conditions. These high resolution shots also don't have the best dynamic range. It is one of the other things that you might want to keep in mind. The 120-degree field of view wide lens lets us get so much more of the scene in the same shot compared to the primary lens. This lens comes in handy when you want to capture a wider scene but there is no space for you to move back, or when you want to capture a different perspective of the scene by standing at the same exact spot. While these images look good at a glance, but it's just an 8 megapixel sensor, so you won't find as many details in these shots. If you look at the edges, you will also see a lot of distortion in these images. It's not just with this phone, even phones that are priced much higher suffer from this, so I don't worry too much about it. Wide shots from this phone show very good dynamic range, almost as good as the shots from the primary camera, and you can see that here in these shots. Let us check out the portrait shots. Like most of the other Xiaomi phones, this one doesn't come with a dedicated depth sensor, so it has to rely on the software to detect the edges of the subject. After taking a lot of portrait shots, I can tell you that the edge detection from this camera is on point. It barely misses on any part of the subject. That being said, colors in these portrait shots look a bit pale and the subject appear a lot sharper, which I am not sure many people are going to like. Other than these two things, I really enjoyed taking portrait shots with this Xiaomi 11i. This is my favorite mode to shoot in on any smartphone, and if you don't take portrait shots with your phone, I suggest you give it a try. This is the easiest way to get professional looking shots out of your smartphone. It is equally good at detecting edges while taking portraits of objects. This particular shot was a tricky one, but other than missing the edges of the reflective signs, I would say it did a good job of detecting the edges given how busy the background is. I really like this particular portrait shot. Look at how good the foreground and background is blurred out and the flamingo is in perfect sharp focus. Here are a few more portrait shots for you guys to look at. Let us now move on to the images which are taken in artificial and lower lighting conditions. This is where most of the mid-budget smartphones fall behind. Let us see how the 11i does in these situations. Images look fairly good when there is plenty of ambient light around, but as the light goes down, so does the quality of the images. There are barely any details in these low light shots and the images are filled with noise. You can turn on the night mode in these situations or when the light gets even lower, but other than making the images appear slightly brighter, it is not making them look better in any significant way. If you zoom in on the night mode shots, you won't find any more details in them and the noise is still there. The images don't exactly look bad, but given the price point of this phone, I expected the low light shots to be better than this. Wide lens by itself is almost useless in anything less than ideal light. There is night mode on the wide lens as well, but even those images won't look all that good. Shots are bright, but there are barely any details in them, and the noise that you see in these images is on a whole another level. Given its low light performance, I just can't suggest this phone to anyone who takes most of the images in lower light. Coming to the front facing camera. This 16 megapixel selfie camera takes decent looking selfies. Again, the colors and skin tones look pale in these shots, but they are not all that bad. If I zoom in, you won't find enough details in the shots. and the white balance in these selfies is just all over the place. While taking portrait selfies, edge detection is again very accurate. Colors are again not that great, but since the background is blurred out, these shots appear to be much sharper compared to the normal selfies. Overall, if you take a lot of selfies, this camera can get the job done, but you might not be completely satisfied with the shots. Here's a video from the front-facing camera of the Mi 11i Hypercharge. You can see how it is handling the overall colors of the scene, exposure, and stabilization when I'm walking around with it. The rear camera can shoot 4K 30fps videos, but these videos are not stabilized. I just can't get over the fact that how companies are getting away by selling 25,000 rupees phones and not even giving basic electronic stabilization while shooting 4K videos. You can shoot 1080p 60fps videos, but these videos are again not stabilized. If you want stabilization, you will have to switch to the 1080p 30fps mode. While these videos look stable, they are not as detailed and you can actually see a lot of jitters with each step that I take. So again, the videos from this phone are not that great, and if you take a lot of videos, I would say you might want to look at some of the other phones in this price range. Now those were all the image and video samples that I had for you guys. After looking at all these samples, I can tell you that shots from this phone look average at best. There are not enough details in the daytime shots. Colors are not that accurate and there is a lot of noise in the low light images. Wide lens and the selfie camera are nothing out of the ordinary, but the macro camera is almost useless in most of the lighting conditions. Videos that this phone can take are not that great either. So all in all, if you like to use the cameras on your phone often, I won't recommend you guys to go with this phone. I don't remember when was the last time I said this about a phone's camera. This is not the first time that Xiaomi is using the Samsung's HM2 sensor. We have seen on some of the other phones like the Mi 11X Pro and the Redmi Note 10 Pro last year. But those phones actually had the Snapdragon processor, which are said to have a better ISP, and this one has a MediaTek processor. So maybe the ISP on this phone is not fine-tuned enough to take better advantage of this sensor. Whatever it is, I really hope Xiaomi is working on making the cameras on this phone a lot better soon. I was hoping the cameras on this phone to be decent at least, because rest of the phone is surprisingly good. But since the cameras are just average at best, I am finding it really difficult to recommend it to someone. After having spent over 25,000 rupees, we deserve to get better cameras than this. Hopefully Xiaomi feels the same way and is working on a software update which makes the cameras on this phone a little better. This is what I think about the cameras on this phone, but you guys saw over 100 image and video samples in this video, so what are your thoughts about this camera? Let me know in the comments. That is it for this video guys. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe to the channel for a lot more quality tech videos like this. You can also check out some of the other videos from this channel. This has been Sagar and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care.